emailed you the last edit presentation as well,
Okay.
Gerard.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Gerard. Okay. Let's just give one more minute for more people to connect, and we'll
Sure.
start.
Thank you.
I think we can start. And I see there are more people joining. So, Henok, please take care of that. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, bonjour. Hola to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the third webinar session in the Africa Teachers webinar series. Today, the topic is policy, funding, and institutional support for CPD programs for teachers. Today, we have a very amazing speakers for this topic, and really can't wait to hear what they would like to present. Before that, though, I would like to give some housekeeping issues. First of all, we have interpretation ready in French and Portuguese and English. Feel free to choose the language you prefer. And recordings and PowerPoint will be made available after the webinar. We'll send out a follow-up email next week with all the resources. And the recordings and PowerPoints for the previous two webinars are also already available on our website. And lastly, please use the Q&A box for any questions, and you can post your comments in the chat as well, as there will be a 30-minute Q&A session after all the presentations. So as I introduced, this is the third webinar in the CPD unit for the webinar series. If you have attended all three webinars, you'll be able to receive certificates of online participation. And our next unit will be on CESA, which is the new continental education strategy for Africa 2026 to 2035. The next webinar session will be on May the 8th, taking place at the AFTRA conference in Angola, but also will have a Zoom available, so you can connect online and participate. Now, without further ado, I'll invite my colleague Patrick Wolugumbe, the Senior Program Officer of International Development Research Center of Canada, to give the opening remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Camelia. I hope you can hear me, colleagues. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. We are excited to be here and to have you join us in this important webinar. So my name is Patrick Walugembe, and I'm a Senior Program Officer at the International Development Research Center, where I work under the Global Partnership for Education, Knowledge, Innovation, and Exchange, or otherwise known as GPA KICS. So I am honored to open our discussion today. The webinar, which is part of a series of teachers, focused on a series focused on teachers in Africa. Today, like my colleague has mentioned, we are focused with the discussion will be on policy, funding, and institutional support for CPD programs. So I'd like to recognize and thank all those that have made this meeting possible. It includes sponsors, it includes partners that have put their hands together to get this moving. So of course, UNESCO ICBA team, which manages the webinar series, has played a primary role getting us here. The European Union's Regional Teachers Initiative for Africa, the Global Partnership for Education, Knowledge, Innovation, Exchange, GPA KICS, which is a joint endeavor with the International Development Research Center in Canada, and the Africa Federation of Teaching Regulatory Authorities, and African Union and UNICEF, that alongside UNESCO make up the consortia that supports the GPE KICS Africa 19 Hub, and of course the Global Gateway team. So please note that the webinar series is monthly. My colleague Camille has mentioned that, and that the information and registration is available on the UNESCO website. And when you get to the website, you will notice that the webinars are typically organized by groups of 3 on specific topics. So, and that the thematic areas of focus include effective continuous teacher professional development, foundational learning and early childhood education, information and communication technology, which is ICT, and artificial intelligence, and education in emergencies. So please get time to get there, get more information, and please register for those as well. We'll be happy to see you there. Again, my work was quite simple, just to open this. So I'm just glad to have you all here. I welcome you all, and I look forward to great interactions. Back to you, Camelia.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for the very warm welcome. I'm sure this webinar session will be very successful. Next, please join me in welcoming Ramya Vivekanandan, who's this, who's a senior education specialist at the Global Partnership for Education, where she leads the team working on quality of education issues. The floor is yours, Ramya.
Thank you so much. Hello, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to have this opportunity to share some keynote remarks with you before we kick off the main proceedings of today's webinar. So I'd like to start by some words from the American writer William Arthur Ward, who once said that teaching is more than imparting knowledge, it is inspiring change. And learning is more than absorbing facts, it is acquiring understanding. So maybe it's not surprising then that the research tells us that beyond any other school-based factor, teacher effectiveness is the most important predictor of student learning. And it's for this reason that the Global Partnership for Education, GPE, identifies quality teaching as a priority. For those who may not be familiar, GPE provides grant funding for up to 90 low and lower middle income countries, the majority of which are in Africa, aligning support with their national education priorities and working through partnerships at the country level. As a priority, quality teaching is a major focus in GPE's work with its partner countries. In many of these contexts, too many teachers lack the knowledge or the pedagogical skills to teach effectively, which ultimately affects children's learning, of course. And so for this reason, continuous professional development, or CPD, of teachers is a crucial strategy to enhance the quality of teaching overall. CPD can, of course, take many forms, and GPE responds, as I said, to country priorities. These are enshrined in what we call a partnership compact, which outlines the country's vision in support of these priorities and serves as a framework for GPE support to the country. Many of the compacts focus on teachers. For example, in Tanzania, the priority is teacher workforce planning and management, and our support includes a focus on sustained teacher CPD. In DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the priority is ensuring competent, motivated, and available teachers, which is supported by GPE funding for different elements, including reinforcing the capacities of teachers who are already in service. But I'm not here today to talk about GPE and our work. I want rather to reflect on what it takes to support continuous professional development for teachers in a context where our broader vision is around transforming education systems to ensure quality education for every child. And I think that we can all agree that this is our shared objective. And so if this is our objective, we have to consider what the enabling factors are that allow an education system to advance towards that goal. So starting first with financing. It's clear that financing, and sustainable financing in particular, is a crucial part of the equation. For GPE, I would say that this is our bread and butter. We have long advocated for domestic financing, the most significant and sustainable source of financing for education. We advocate for governments to allocate 20% of domestic budgets to education, ensuring that that financing is allocated and spent to reach the most marginalized, so considerations of equity, and that the funds go as far as possible for improving learning, considerations of efficiency. But of course, many of our partner countries are unable to ramp up education spending due to worsening debt burdens and limited fiscal space. Over a third of our partner countries with available data spend more on debt servicing than they do on education. And of course, with the current global landscape and the many ongoing challenges faced by countries, these are clearly constraining resources even further. So in such a context, we need to think about new ways to broaden financing options and tools to catalyze more education financing. Innovative financing instruments allow us to catalyze more funds, bring in new partners, and transform debt or debt repayment into investments in education. And GPE has been on the front line in terms of developing and offering these instruments to countries. This becomes all the more interesting when we consider CPD. In most countries, the majority of domestic financing for education goes toward recurrent expenditure, most notably teacher remuneration. And investments in areas such as CPD have often been supported by donors. In the current context especially, we have to consider innovative financing as a means to locking in more sustainable funding for these investments. But of course, financing is not the only piece of the puzzle. Another crucial enabling factor is policy, buttressed by planning and monitoring in support of country priorities, including in this case, CPD. This recognizes the importance of coherent national frameworks, legislation, regulation, and orientation in driving reform. Education sector planning and monitoring is then crucial to operationalize, implement, learn, and adapt. In relation to CPD and the countries that I mentioned earlier, Tanzania, for example, is replete with CPD programs that have been running in some cases for decades. The main challenge of these programs has been in sustaining them beyond projects, since they have not been adequately mainstreamed in the teacher education institutional setup. And so to address this challenge, the government has adopted a national framework for teacher continuous professional development, as well as a national plan for school and cluster-based TCPD. The framework is aimed at ensuring that TCPD programs are sustainably mainstreamed in the teacher education process. Similarly, in DRC, the government is working to develop a national policy for in-service or continuous teacher training, which will outline the vision as well as the means whereby this vision will be implemented. There has also been progress there towards developing a framework for the recognition of qualifications and credits from different in-service courses. Partnership is also crucial. And GPE itself, of course, is a partnership between governments, but also civil society organizations, including teacher associations, private sector, foundations, donors, and multilateral organizations, such as UNESCO. We believe firmly in inclusive dialogue between all these parties within the context of coordinating bodies, such as local education groups, or LEGs, and in processes such as the development of education sector plans and the aforementioned partnership compacts. When it comes to questions of teacher CPD, I would argue that the most crucial partners are teachers themselves. It is they who are on the front lines and who can best relay what is needed in terms of teacher upskilling, continuous support, and integration of new technologies. It's why the OECD refers to teachers as the architects of change. So in Ghana, for example, Transforming Teacher Education and Learning, or TTEL, is a nonprofit teacher organization which works with the National Council of Tertiary Education, colleges of education, and universities to design and implement fit-for-purpose teacher training and regular school-based mentoring. Key to success are TTL's relationships with the government, teacher education institutions, teacher unions, and other key education actors. Partnership, in other words. I'm highlighting this aspect particularly because in GPE's next strategy, GPE 2030, we anticipate leaning in further around this particular issue, partnership and engagement of teachers in policy dialogue. In order to ensure quality CPD for the benefit of teachers and ultimately learners, such engagement is crucial. A last area then that I'd like to highlight is innovation. As we strive to ensure quality teaching, there is a need to think about CPD differently. We know from the evidence, for example, that the traditional cascade model, workshop-focused in-service training of YOR has been shown to have limited impact. We also know that effective CPD must be both targeted and sustained. There have been many innovations in this space over the years that are gradually spreading or scaling. For example, school or cluster-based coaching, as well as the creative use of new technologies. The global evidence, such as that encapsulated in the report of the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel from 2023, suggests that certain pedagogical innovations have particular cost effectiveness at scale, notably, for example, structured pedagogy and teaching at the right level. As more countries apply or scale these practices, we have to consider the implications for CPD and adapt accordingly. And there are many countries that are working to do so, such as, for example, Cote d'Ivoire and Zambia, from which we can learn. Today's conversation, to conclude, will be interesting because it will bring us insights and experiences on all these pieces: financing, policy, partnership, innovation, and consider how these vital enabling factors relate to better continuous professional development for teachers in Africa. I urge us to listen actively and to consider together what we can learn and take away to our own countries and organizations in our shared quest to support our teachers. It is through their dedication and passion that we can together build a brighter future for our children. Let us continue to support and empower our teachers, ensuring that they have the resources, training, and support that they need to succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ramia, for a very inspiring speech full of examples, and also really glad to hear about the GPE 2030 strategy about engaging teachers in dialogues more. Next, we'll have Dr. Diego Angel Ordinola, sorry if I mispronounced your name, who will give us a rich presentation about education finance and the global trends, as well as the trends in sub-Saharan Africa. The floor is yours, Diego.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, to UNESCO ICBA for the invitation and for the organization of this workshop. And also thank you, Ramia, for opening the stage to some of the remarks I'm going to be saying, which are going to go into more detail, basically, of what Ramia, some of the points that Ramia made. So if we go to the next slide, well, my name is Diego Angel, and I'm a global thematic lead for education finance. I work on skills development and finance, and currently I am leading one nice endeavor, which is a global report on education finance. So that global report on education finance comes at a time of declining public and international financing for education. While this is the results of some shocks, such as COVID and other things, there is a trend. We have data showing that public interest for education is decreasing vis-a-vis other topics such as energy or health. And then we had COVID, which put a lot of emphasis on health. So if we see recent trends, and then we work with UNESCO on a publication called the Education Finance Watch, and we monitor spending on education and trends over time, we have seen that education spending is declining. It's declining public investment in education, and also external investment in education is declining as well. In some regions, household expenditures in education have picked up as a response of those trends. Now, if we go to sub-Saharan Africa, it's one of the regions where spending in education has increased the most, but it has only increased at the pace of its population. So the per capita spending per child has become flat and has started to decrease a little bit when we see the last decade, data from the last decade. If we go to the next slide, Then we also, something that Rania mentioned, is that in sub-Saharan Africa, this is a challenge because there is we know these are tough times in terms of availability of bilateral and multilateral aid. Also, there's mounting debt. If we see there are some countries in sub-Saharan Africa that are starting to pay more on interest service than on education or investments in education, but the expectation is that in the next years, the demographic boom in sub-Saharan Africa will need a lot of investment for a rapid expansion of the system in terms of students coming into the system, in terms of teachers required to enter the system, and of course in terms of infrastructure and others. So in a way, financing is drying out at a moment where it's most needed. If we go to the next slide, then we can basically show two facts. One of them is if you see today or every year, the world spends on education about $53 trillion. That's the equivalent of almost the whole economy of France and Italy put together, what they produce. Now, when we see where those $53 trillion are spent, basically most of them are in high income countries. That's the big bubble to the left of the chart, meaning that about half of that expenditure goes into higher income countries. Now, if you do upper middle income countries and you combine those two bubbles, then actually the expenditure is about 80%. And then the expenditure in education in low middle income countries and low income countries is very little. What I wanted to highlight is the small little bubble of low income countries, meaning that the countries that has the more students that need the most expansion are spending very little on education. Of course, relative to their GDP, it's a lot. It's a lot of effort in terms of investments, but in terms of nominal money, is very little. And what we are seeing is that, for example, low-income countries spend per student about $55 per child per year, while high-income countries spend about $8,500 per child per year. Now, what are the implications of that expenditure? In the right side, we have a simulation. So what would it entail for an education system? How much would it need to spend based on what we see to be able to reduce learning poverty? And then those thresholds basically tell you that if you're spending less than $300 or about $300 per kid per year, you are not likely to have learning poverty rates below 80%. Now, if you want, based on the available data, to reduce or to have a probability of have learning poverty by 50%, meaning that your kids at the end of primary education know how to read a simple text, then you need to spend about $2,000 per kid per capita. So in a way, in conclusion, is that it's very challenging for low-income countries and for low and middle-income countries to invest per capita what is needed to ensure adequate learning. If we go to the next slide, well, we can talk about efficiency. Well, spending, it's not only about more resources, it's about spending resources better. And that's true. But when we go into low-income countries and low-middle-income countries, it seems that efficiency is not a binding constraint, meaning that even if you were able to decrease all inefficiencies in the system, which may be between 20 and 30% of allocations, still you would not have enough resources to achieve adequate learning outcomes in terms of the expected years of quality education that a child will get or the expected learning poverty. So even if we had a magic wand and corrected all inefficiencies, it would not be enough to ensure high quality education, especially in low income countries. Now, when we go into middle income countries and upper middle income countries, the story differs. Why? Because you have countries like mine, Colombia, spending the same amounts of money of countries like Kazakhstan, but Kazakhstan is doing much better in many outcomes, especially on expected years of quality education, on learning, and also on youth engagement. So efficiency becomes more of a binding constraint as countries get richer. but not when they are early in their levels of development. Next. Well, now this is it's kind of a regression, or is that a lot of data points showing the relationship between education expenditure and education outcomes once you control for GDP. And what you see is there is no relations. Look like a flat cloud. So basically, education spending alone does not explain outcomes. Now, once that spending is efficient, if you go if you hit next, then the chart changes a little bit. So there's an animation there. So let's say, yeah. So basically, once you control for GDP per capita and also for efficiency in your spending, then the relationship between education spending and outcomes increases a little bit. It's still flat, but it has a positive relationship and it's actually statistically significant. Now, if we go to the next animation, if you control for GDP per capita, but also you control for adequacy, which is what you need to achieve the SDGs, and these are based on data and simulations that the World Bank and the IMF is conducting together under this report, then the relationship is really stored. Meaning that it seems that a main binding constraint to basically ensure learning is adequacy of spending, which is, I would say, this amount of per capita allocation per child that ensures learning. If we go to the next slide, well, now we need to talk about teachers, right? So basically, especially in low-income countries, most of the resources, they go to current expenditures. And within current expenditures, which is basically teachers and operations, most of the resources, about 74%, go into salaries. That's opposite to, let's say, in high-income countries, where those same costs are only 50%, leading to more capacity for introducing investments, technologies, and other type of innovations. Now, Rania also mentioned really recent work by GIP, which is this global team advocating good policies and programs. But what we are showing is that with the current level of expenditures in sub-Saharan Africa, and especially in low-income countries, countries may not be able to afford even the most cost-effective policies. Even a structured learning, for example, very cost-effective, or teaching at the right level, maybe $15 to $20 per kid per year, but compare it to 55 and very limited capacity for additional investment, because those 55 are mainly going to pay teacher salaries in some countries. So when we go to the right hand, is the wages. No, it's not even current. It's wages as a percentage of total education expenditure. And then in some countries in sub-Saharan Africa, that share of expenditure is almost 90%. If we go to the next slide, then I want to evoke this that Ramya said. Well, it's a good investment. If you have limited resources, of course you need to invest in teachers. As she said, teacher effectiveness is the main predictor for learning. So under limited resources, I think that's the way to go. But also there is important need for investments. Now, one of the messages that we're trying to deliver is that it's important to avoid earmarking. So let's say there are low-income countries that have reached their targets. They invest now 5% of or X% of GDP in education, but still the per capita allocations are very small. So in a way, we have to be celebratory because they achieved international targets, but sometimes those targets may not work in low-income countries. So what we need in low-income countries is to have the cost of delivering quality education. And that cost needs to factor resource prices, especially competitive wages for teachers. You need to attract good teachers because, again, we said that teacher effectiveness is the main prediction of learning. Then you need to have not only good teachers, but enough teachers. So you have to quantify robust staffing ratios, broad access. You want to cover your population and hopefully give a little bit of or some funds for overheads. Now, not only that, but then you also have to factor some system of financing that factors for local and structural constraints. Is more expensive to deliver education in isolated areas, is more expensive to deliver education to poorest kids. So normally financing systems generally be adequate in the terms of the cost and resource prices, but also need to tailor or target investments where they are needed the most, which is actually not happening. Some of the data that we have actually shows that the per capita allocations within a country tend to favor richer kids rather than poorer kids. So there's not only little allocations in low-income countries, but within little-income countries, the poorest kids get less spending per capita. And then, well, preliminary financing just suggests that if you do that exercise, the provision of high-quality education is beyond public budgetary means in low-income countries and middle-income countries. But let me finish with a positive message in the next slide, which is that there is actually available resources out there. When we talked about the bubbles, we saw that for low-income countries, it's really a small bubble. Now, if you were going to use available financing, so we're talking available financing, let's say combining the resources in ODA, plus the resources in global philanthropy, plus the resources in financing, which is external debt. And then we would tap into large funds, such as remittances of pensions, either taxing those transactions or channeling those funds to education, and maybe taking just 5% of all these private capital funds. Actually, only that, it would be enough to increase per capita spending in low-income countries by tenfold. But of course, that's not automatic, because right now, most ODA, most philanthropy, and most bilateral debt is actually not going to the lowest income countries and is not going to education. And actually within education is not going to the right programs, actually subsidizing programs such as scholarships, which tend to be sometimes quite regressive, and so on and so forth. So there needs to be a change in the international architecture and in maybe a consensus to start targeting these resources to low-income countries. It's not a whole lot of money when we think about it. And it's possible basically to increase that spend, to increase per capita spending in Africa. And also, of course, is leverage taxations and private contributions. Households in Africa are spending significantly. Sometimes 25% of the expenditure is from households. So basically also, unfortunately, increasing the tax base or using innovative ways at the local level to bring more funds, more private funds, is also going to be important in domestic resource mobilization. So that's kind of the main message of the global report on education finance, is that really where the money is on government expenditure and on households. So if you really want to finance good education, you need to really leverage taxation and public finance and really think about that innovatively, and also boost household contributions in an equitable way. And last but not least, external financing can make a difference, but only in low-income countries and if well targeted. Next, and then I'm actually wrapping up and going into the CPD. Well, now we're talking about teachers, and then you have scarce resources, especially in low-income countries, and 90% of those resources are allocated to teaching, and then teaching is the main predictor of effectiveness. So it's important that within those expenditures, you use the funds well. So there are several ways to support teachers become more effective. Now the World Bank and the teachers team is really supporting a more of a preventive approach, which is trying to revise hiring policies and actually pay more attention to initial training so that you prevent instead of correct. Of course, there are other things like testing, having standards and inspections to make sure that what the teachers are expected to do, they are doing it, not only just to point fingers, but to help them, to help those who are not doing it. So it's formative type of inspections and testing. Then, of course, we're going to talk about CPD, which is continuing professional development, which is the topic of this talk, but there are other things in a way that could support teachers. But let me delve into continuing professional development in the next slide. This is actually data from UNESCO ICBA. And then it's just trying to highlight that in low-income countries, the qualifications or the standards set for entry of teachers are not as strict as in high-income countries. So, for example, in low-income countries, a teacher with secondary education or with lower or upper secondary education are eligible to teach primary education. That's part of their rules. But in high-income countries, that rarely happens. You normally need a teacher who is professional to be able to enter into a classroom. So that means that overall, the stock of teachers that are now teaching in low-income countries have less educational attainment. But at the same time, if you look to the chart on the right, in low-income countries, these teachers are the ones who actually benefit less from CPD programs. So even though they have less education stock or less education endowments, actually the systems invest less in CPD than other systems. If we go to the next slide, we can actually say, well, there's some policy, there's a policy room for improvement. So one of them is well, there's a lot of countries that have a CPD framework. There's still some countries that don't. So it's important to actually continue to push this type of policies and frameworks. Also, the incentives, right? Do you give incentives to participants or to teachers to participate in CPD? And actually there, most countries say no. And that's important because in some cases, CPD, especially when it is the traditional in-classroom, it takes time, takes effort. And if there are no incentives, then maybe teachers don't show up. And then the other is incentives to career path. Also, sometimes this CPD is outside of working time. So the scale, that's a tax in transportation and time for teachers, but still those participating in those programs is not linked to, let's say, some type of recognition when they advance in their careers. So aligning those incentives are important beyond having a framework. Next. Then we talk about access, and then there's also a improvement for access. I mean, we mentioned that CPD is not as common in low-income countries as it is in high, but then even in Africa, according to this survey, most of the countries, basically almost 18 out of 30, they actually claim that less than 40% of teachers, or less than half of the teachers, participate in some CPD every year. So there's room for more take-up in a way. And the same happens with not only teachers, but with their managers. Next slide. And I'm almost ready to wrap up. Is the adequacy of CPDs? Well, you may say the incentives maybe need to be redesigned. You need to have more access to CPD, but also the quality of the CPD is important. And there are only a minority, so basically 8 of our 36 respondents, they actually claim that CPD is adequate. So basically, and that's important, because if the teachers believe that this is not adequate, then of course they are not going to participate and won't have incentives to spend their time in doing so. And let me finish with the last slide. We believe that well, we are going to be talking about the Africa strategy, the CESA, in the next couple of workshops. And I think the CESA has a big line or item on teachers, educators, and caregivers. So this is a good opportunity to bring this topic in the debate and really try to set up some good benchmarks for improving CPD, given the context that I just mentioned before. And the last slide, let me stop there, also echoes what Ramya said. Now we know more about what works and what doesn't work in CPD. The traditional cascade model in a workshop, in a classroom, 50 kilometers away from the school, it doesn't have to be the only CPD type of model. Now there is coaching, there is technology, and there are rapidly changing ways to provide effective CPD. And we invite you to read some of the resources that talk about that. in our website, World Bank Education. There's also a finance page if you want to dig more on the Education Finance Watch. And just to give you a teaser, we are going to launch very soon with the teachers team at the World Bank the book called From Perspective to Prepare Teachers, which is actually putting that emphasis on the preventing route, which is more investment in initial teacher education as a priority policy for human resources in education. With that, let me wrap up and really thank you very much for this invitation. I may have taken a bit more than expected, but I thank you very much for your patience. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Diego, and that was okay. It was a really thorough presentation about the global trends as well as the situation in Africa, and I really enjoyed listening about the innovative ways to target this finance gap. And thank you for sharing the resources. A note that we are preparing a resource kit for all participants and will be made available online about the useful documents regarding the 3 topics in this webinar unit about CPD. Next, after this bird's eye view about the global trends, we have case studies. And the first one will be from Mr. Gerard Murasira, the Director of Teacher Training Unit of Rwanda Basic Education Board, will be giving us a presentation about the CPD situation in Rwanda. Please, Gerard.
Thank you very much. My name is Murasira Gerard, as mentioned. I'm the Director of Teacher Training in the Rwanda Basic Education Board. And being a Director of Teacher Training, I also have under my responsibility CPD. So let me first say that I'm happy to be a member or a presenter in this platform, mostly about CPD, because it is actually part of my responsibility back home, but also it is also my area of research as I'm a PhD student. So I'm trying to work on CPD. So this makes this topic very fascinating to me. Well, let me again say that, start with this kind of saying that a teacher who stops learning stops teaching. So by stopping teaching, it's all about teaching without cutting edge methodologies. So that's where we actually abstract the importance of CPD, which is teacher, I would say, teacher support or teacher capacity building. What I'm trying to share here is all about the practices in Rwanda. Let me say that in Rwanda, the continuous professional development is actually basing whatever it is doing, being a design implementation on a number of policy documents, starting with the Vision 2050, where they actually place education as one of the strategy for reaching all the dreams of the vision. NST 2, the National Strategy for Transformation, also highlights education as a priority to having this transformation of the country. Coming to SSP, Education Sector Strategic Plan. This is actually a document, a policy document that guides the education sector in Rwanda and highlights as well the CPD, continuous professional development or capacity building of teachers, as one of the priorities. Then after this education sector strategic plan comes TDM policy. TDM policy is teacher development and management policy. This is all about a policy document that makes another extra mile and shows even a number of CPD courses that have to be undertaken by all teachers. So there is also a ministerial instructions also that highlights the importance of CPD, continuous professional development, and goes ahead and even say that in every week, every school should dedicate 3 periods, mostly on Wednesdays. But again, it is flexible according to the school. But at least every school should avail 3 hours, 3 periods for CPD, teacher CPD. That is also on the timetables of the schools. Again, I would also add that there is now a CPD framework under which all practices are actually drawn from. Next. So those were the documents that all the practices in the country go with. I would also have to mention in Rwanda that we have objectives. Actually, CPD, or the CPD framework has 3 main objectives. The one, to support teacher development, to improve learning outcome, and to ensure every learner receives a high quality education. But not only that, but also delivered in a very inclusive environment, not to leave any learner behind. So those are mainly the objectives here in Rwanda. Next. Next. Well, so when we talk about CPD, sorry, no, if you can go back. If you talk about CPD, we actually divide them into 2. There is the site-based CPD. This is a CPD that is a kind of training that is structured and organized, and most of the times, all the times, takes place outside the working place, outside the school. That means. So that's where actually the previous presenter talked about the cascade mode, the very traditional one. This is where people go in the site somewhere and get trained and come and train the rest of the colleagues. That is one. But most here in this presentation, I dwell much on the second, which is school-based CPD. That's where now teachers in the school, in the context of a school, address issues that are contextually at school. Next. So I'll be much in this presentation talking much about the school-based CPD. So under the school-based CPD, you have some actors, main ones. I'll explain a little bit later. But we have what we call school subject mentor. Have what we call early childhood education mentor. And you have inclusive education focal teacher. We have CPD coordinator. And these 4 work with the leadership of the school on the structure, the deputy head teacher, and the head teacher himself. Next, so this is the team that drives CPD at school level. So I would wish also to show the structure of CPD at school level. I've been mentioned those titles in the previous slide. So we have at the head a head teacher who is deputized by the deputy. Under these, they have a number of departments. The Department of Science and Math, the Department of Humanities and Social Studies, the Department of Languages, and the Department of Early Childhood Education or Early Child and Lower Primary Education. So under these, we have CPD coordinators at school level. 1 by 1 CPD coordinators, 1 for primary, 1 for secondary, where we have primary and secondary in the same school. because in our context, have some standalone primaries and some others that are group scolaire with pre-primary, primary, and secondary. And the inclusive education focal person, this came as something that cuts across all levels of education, because it is very important. So very practically, we have school subject mentors. We have a school subject mentor who works with other colleagues in the science department and math. And that is where now they sit under the leadership of under the coordination, by the way, of the school-based school subject mentor. He coordinates other colleagues, identify issues, and try to address them through CPDs. So those four, the school subject mentor for science and math, the one for humanities, the one for languages, and the one for pre-primary. So that is how it is done. So there is a timetable. There is they sit and try to find out the issues within a circle, and then the issues, they choose one of the colleagues to try to address them in their meetings. Next. So that was all about the structure. So I would wish now to come talk about those actors, those implementers, those ones who lead CPD at schools. What is their role? What is their qualifications? Minimum qualification for them. We don't just pick anyone. I would wish to first start with the one we have called CPD coordinator. Actually, this is the one who is very much active in terms of, in as far as CPD is concerned, because the rest, the deputy, the head teacher, and the deputy head teacher, and the heads of department, these ones have their routine responsibilities. But this one is given, besides teaching responsibility, also has this responsibility of coordinating CPD. In other words, coordinating the school subject mentors. So we don't just pick anyone. We pick someone at least with a bachelor's degree in education, and with enough experience, more than 3, and with proven experience in actually undertaking a number of CPDs. So should show evidence of participation in a number of CPDs. So the responsibilities is actually coordination. If I may not read everything, it's actually coordination, but also gauging and try to know what's the need. Is the one who support in trying to, of course, in a collaboration with the mentors, try to identify the issues that are there and try to make an action plan to address such issues. Next. So the second is school subject mentor or early child education mentor. Is also, that one should be an A2 or A0, that is advanced level, depending on the level. It's primary A0, meaning A2, that is advanced level, and so on and so on. But that should be at least an experience of more than three years. The roles and responsibilities are almost the same. It's just coordination on this level. Next is all about the inclusive education and focal person. This one makes sure that inclusivity cuts across all levels and all CPDs. Next. So I also thought of saying what makes teachers motivated or attend the CPDs is that the first thing is that in our policy documents, there is an articles that say that the promotion of teachers should base, among other criteria, the attending successfully a number of CPDs. So that makes teachers work and participate in CPDs. So we have not yet started this. This was signed, the policy document was signed last year. So, but we are planning to use this as a motivational factor. Another one is just creating a conducive environment where teachers need really to voluntarily participate in the CPDs. Another one we think is a motivation factor is that for the CPDs, there's also a certification. They have a certificate that is recognized. This is linked to the first motivation factor. Next. Next, please. Yeah, so there is a number of challenges. One is limited funding, which is always there, but also people mindset, teachers' mindset. Some feel there's no need of going for continuous studies. I would say call them studies because they have got their degrees, so they are qualified, so they think it's okay. But also, these coordinators, we said, though we stick on a number of documents, qualifications, but again, we also find some are not really at a very good level, and yet they're the ones supporting others, mostly in the primary level. Next. I would also want to say that to make CPD possible, actually this is one of the last slides, to make CPD possible, it's not only the government that works alone, it works with the development partners, and these development partners are at a number of levels. At the ministerial level, there's what we call sector working group, and down there is subsector working group at the subsector level, that's REB, and then comes teacher professional development technical working group at the departmental level, and then CPD task force at directorate level. So all these three levels, they are met, government and other stakeholders, to think about CPD, how it can be easily conducted. Thanks. This actually brings me next maybe to thank everyone. That is what I think I had the plan to share with the people in the house. Thank you very much. I'm happy to maybe share some other through questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gerard. Yes, thank you for a very thorough presentation about the structure and the minimum qualifications and all the requirements for CPD in Rwanda. And true, I think your part about the motivational factors does respond to one of the Q&A questions I saw, and we'll elaborate on that in the Q&A session. Next, we'll have Jenny Wilmot, who's the co-CEO of STIR Education, which is an international NGO working in Uganda, India, Indonesia, and beyond. Yes, Jenny, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Camilla. And hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here, and it's been fantastic to hear all the insights from the speakers so far. I'm Jenny. I'm the co-CEO of STIR Education. We work in a number of countries. I'm based in Uganda, in Kampala, which is where I'm speaking from now. I'll go to the next slide. So just to give a quick overview of STIR, our vision is a world where teachers love teaching and children love learning. And our mission is to support education systems to reignite intrinsic motivation so that every official teacher and child is motivated to learn and improve. Since 2012, we've supported over 500,000 teachers in India, Uganda, and Indonesia through high quality professional development focused on intrinsic fostering intrinsic motivation. So that inner drive to teach and to teach well and to encourage children to love learning, so that improvements in the classroom are driven by a love of teaching. And we've done that and supported systems to deliver teacher professional development through really strong learning partnerships with government, these are really deep collaborations with government education systems to co-design the CPD content so that teachers engage fully and we subsequently see change in the classroom. At the centre of the model is what we call teacher network meetings, so peer networks in schools, in individual schools. No, teachers don't travel to different schools, it's within a school. And at those meetings, the teachers are introduced to CPD content, usually teaching strategies, teaching tools they can use to improve teaching in their classroom. The head teachers or the school leaders run those networks, and we think teacher agency is really important. So teachers, they're introduced to the content, yes, but then they spend time thinking about how can I use this and contextualize it in the classroom. They then practice that with their peers, they receive feedback, and in between the network meetings, teachers observe each other. So we encourage peer classroom observation and feedback. So the whole basis of the model is, yes, training, but also reflection, feedback, coaching and mentoring, looking at the kind of broader definition of CPD. Next slide. So a few questions that I'll try to cover today. So how do we engage governments in the CPDs and in financing CPDs? How do we involve other NGOs? And what are the implications for the private sector and for donors? So a bit more, just onto the next slide. Just to tell you a bit more about the programme here in Uganda specifically. So we work alongside the Ministry of Education and Sports to design and deliver teacher CPD at scale. And we work across primary and secondary. We have long-term, or quite long-term, memorandums of understanding with government. So we have a 5-year one with the government at the moment. And we really focus on trying to sustain the programme and embed it in the system. And we try to do that from the very start of working with the government. And as we've scaled over time and scaled to more and more districts, we've embedded the programme and the approach and therefore the CPDs increasingly. So we're currently working with the government to coordinate CPDs in 90% of the secondary sector, so 90% of districts at secondary and almost 50% at primary. And you can see the numbers there in terms of what that means in terms of reach. Thanks, sorry. They're just over 100,000 teachers, although that's based on fairly historic government data, so we think it's probably more than that now. So there's a few principles that we apply when thinking about how we work with government. So the first is to maximise the effectiveness of what is already there. I think when we were in early iterations of being an NGO, maybe 12, 13 years ago, we made the mistake of kind of setting up a parallel system where we would be delivering CPDs, and we realised that that was a mistake, and actually it's much better to work with the existing system. And then secondly, to ensure that we're always aligning with government policies and we're responsive to government policies. So though we're a global organisation, our programme and the content that we deliver actually looks quite different from country to country, and in some places from region to region or district to district. So at different levels of the system and the government here, we work at all the different levels, and the different levels resource the programme in different ways. And that might be through funding, so funding events, for example, or it's also through time. And the different levels, they commit a lot of time to leading and developing the programme. So at national level, we have a co-design process. So the CPD content, that the teachers receive is co-designed with the ministry every term. And that co-design process involves actors across the ministry from different departments. It also includes teacher voice. So we do a needs assessment with teachers about what they want and what they'd like to see. But also they're really important in terms of looking at the content, co-creating the examples that are in the content and just bringing it to life and making sure it's relevant to their experiences in the classroom. And then also with government, we align, as I said, with policy. Crucially here, that's the National Teacher Policy, which has a focus on in-service CPDs and to work on some of that, the accreditation of CPDs and the incentivizing of it that Diego mentioned at the beginning. Uganda's not there yet, but is moving in that direction. And I guess because we are really focused on that, that really incentivized the government to work with us and to lead the program. We've also at times influenced policy. So when the National Teacher Policy was developed here, we also helped them develop a teacher incentive framework, which specifically looked at teacher motivation as a key part of the policy. We primarily work, though, at district level, what I guess you might call the middle tier, and we work with lots of different officials across districts. The two main ones at primary are the centre coordinating tutors that have a role in supporting schools in teacher development, and it's secondary with the representatives of the Association of Secondary School Head Teachers of Uganda, ASHU, which is a membership organisation for head teachers in Uganda. But we also work with the district education officers, the district inspectors of schools, the deputy principals of the teacher training colleges. And they all play different leadership roles in delivering the programme and ensuring that the teacher CPDs, the different elements of the teacher CPDs are delivered. And as we've scaled, these actors in the system have increasingly owned the programme. So our team and our programmes team here is relatively small relative to the scale at which we work. So we have about 12 staff members in the programmes team specifically, and they mentor and train and support the district level officials to lead and deliver the programme. The district officials then run the training and mentor for school leaders, mentor school leaders, observe the network meetings, the CPD, and collect data on the different levels of training. And then school leaders equally coordinate the CPD in their schools with support from the districts. They run the network meetings, they observe classroom observations, observe classrooms and collect data. And that collection of data is really critical as we scale. And actually our team, we now just collect data that triangulates the data. So the data that assesses the quality of the training, but also the impact it has in the classroom. We have a specific data dashboard now that brings together all of the data that the system is collecting. And we were looking at that yesterday, actually, and we're pleased to see that in the last 6 weeks or so, school leaders have collected data on around 5,000 network meetings that have taken place this term. So it's a sample of what's happening, but that's part of our sustainability strategy. And what we hope is over time that the programme becomes increasingly sustained and we eventually move out and it's embedded in the system. In terms of financing, ASHU at the secondary level and then the districts, the education officers in the districts co-finance the programme. So they fund all of the events and activities at district level and some at regional level, so mainly at secondary. So that's all things like the food for training, the transport for training for the district officials, for the head teachers. And of course, they give a huge amount of their time in terms of leading the programme. Next slide, thank you. In terms of working with NGOs, there's a number of ways. So just before I go into amplification, on the ground here in Uganda, it's what we try to do as much as possible is to work in collaboration and coordination with other NGOs so that we're not competing with each other and so that we're not putting too much pressure on the time of district officials. We're also currently working with the government to look at the accreditation of CPDs for teachers and how that can with how they can gain credits to support their relicensing of teaching. And what we're hopeful for is that the NGOs will come together and look at the quality of CPDs that we're delivering, and that training will count as credits towards the teacher's CPD. In terms of amplification, there's a couple of ways. That's a word we use when we talk about amplifying the impact of other people's work. So we obviously in Uganda have an architecture, if you like, of different levels of the system we work with, where we can run content through the system, and it eventually reaches all of the teachers in these network meetings. And an example of where another NGO has used that is RTI, I think last year and the year before, wanted to share their science of teaching content with teachers in Uganda. So they worked with the system and with us to use our existing architecture. We also are looking at how we can support other programs to really think about teacher motivation, and how we can use the experience we've got of teacher motivation over a decade to kind of build the principles of motivation into existing programs. An example of where we're working here is in Ghana, where we're working with TTAL, which Rama mentioned, the Transforming Teaching, Education and Learning NGO in Ghana, to work on, to support them on a national secondary education transformation program. And we're very focused on the motivation element of that. So what that looks like is things we're supporting research on motivation. We're helping them think about how do you monitor and evaluate motivation, and we're reviewing CPD content. So as an organization, we're trying to think there's a couple of different ways to scale impact. One is through direct implementation, as we do in Uganda, and another is through using what we've learned and what we know about working with government and intrinsic motivation to support other programs. And then my final slide, just move on one slide, thanks, is around working with the private sector. So our existing collaborations with private sector are twofold. So in Uganda, where we work, particularly at secondary school, around 75% of secondary school provision is private. And private schools are members of ASHU, and therefore they take part in the programme, but they also contribute to the programme financially, both through their membership fees, but also through the leadership that and the time that they spend on the programme. And then we are also lucky to have funding from private philanthropy. And I guess in the post-USAID world, the need for high quality, this is an obvious point, but the need for high quality education interventions will not suddenly stop. And what we'll need is greater collaboration between different actors in the sector to maximize impact, and to think more creatively about how we can scale that impact together. The private sector clearly has a huge role to play in that. I hope the ideas I've shared today provide some examples of how working differently and collaboratively can deliver greater impact across systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you for a very detailed presentation about your work, how you work with the government. And also, I really appreciate you mentioning the wrong strategy at first, and then finding the right way with working with the existing structure of CPD, as well as the exit strategy. That's very important for the sustainability of the program. Without further ado, as well, I would like to leave at least some time for Q&A. We'll have our next speaker, Mr. Leon Mnjenzi, who's the coordinator of the Inter-Country Quality Node on Teaching and Learning at ADEA. Leon, you may turn your mic on. Leon? Mr. Leon, are you there? Do you have a connection issue or something?
Yes,
Okay.
please. And I'm trying to put my mic just on. It was somehow complicated, but now it's okay now.
No worries, no worries. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. As you mentioned, and I'm Mujenzi Leon. I'm the coordinator of the Intercountry Quality Node on Teaching and Learning at ADEA. Normally, this is a role and responsibility occupied by different countries, but for now, it's Rwanda. And I'm also the head of teacher development management and career and counseling department here in Rwanda at Rwanda Basic Education Board. So I will be very brief just to respect time. Let us see, first of all, when we talk about CPD and importance and the key focus area. As a CPD is a structured and ongoing process of professional learning aimed at improving teachers' knowledge and skills and the competencies. And its importance is to enhance teaching quality and the student outcomes, and also strengthen professional identity and growth, and support education reforms and national development goals. There's a key focus area as CPD in teacher and the learner performance. Second is the career progression and licensing and accreditation, and finally, scalability of CPD programs. So next, please. What are the outcomes normally of the CPDs? We have, first of all, enhanced teacher competence and the professionalism, and improved learning of performance and engagement, structured teacher career progression, alignment with licensing and professional standard, and finally, scalability and the sustainability of CPD program. Those are outcomes of CPD. For CPD and the teacher or learner performance, for next slide, there are impacts. First of all, there is strengthened pedagogical skills and the content mastery, confidence in using innovative teaching methods, lesson planning, and delivery. This is one and the first impact of the CPD. The second, enhanced the use of ICT in teaching and learning, improved the classroom management and learner engagement, improved ability to assess and support diverse learners, greater collaboration with the peers and the stakeholders in education, and higher job satisfaction motivation. That is for impact on teachers, but there is also impact on learners. Increased engagement, participation, motivation, higher academic performance and skills acquisition, that's a very important one, effective assessment techniques, and that supports student growth, and improve teacher-student relationship that foster a positive learning environment, and finally, development of problem-solving and critical thinking skills. This is very important. Next, let me talk about CPD and teacher career progression. Professional growth. First of all, CPD has a structured pathway for promotion and specialization, encourages continuous learning and leadership roles, supports specialization and diversification, provides certification and licensing requirements, and offers opportunities for career advancement. But there is also recognition and motivation for career progression linked to CPD, milestone, incentives such as financial rewards, certificates, and public recognition, but also increases job security and professional recognition, and finally enhances teaching competence. And the next, CPD and the teacher career progression again, if I may say, let's talk about CPD and teacher career progression in Rwanda. We have, first of all, pre-service teacher education, where we have 3 years by training our teachers for pre-primary and primary, teacher training for year 1, year 2, and year 3. But after 3 years, let me give you just a background of this. Normally, we are training our teachers in teacher training colleges. After 3 years of secondary schools, we add also 3 years in teacher training college. So that's why we say teacher training in year 1, year 2, and year 3. And after 6 years of secondary schools, they have to start now job. And we do what we call induction probation for basic level. And we give example of CPDs, school orientation, school-based CPD, classroom management, course, and lesson planning. But there is a progression chart for new qualified teachers having induction. There is also a mid-term induction, and at the end we give again that induction to have really competent teachers. Next, we let's say this progression, we have like 7 categories. One, we have as the new teacher is the first category of a junior teacher. The second teacher, after 3 years, they get this teacher. After junior teacher, you will be a teacher. After 3 years again, you have a senior teacher. And the fourth one is principal teacher. And we have the fifth one, senior principal teacher. And sixth, there is master teacher. And finally, honorary teacher. Those are the categories. And this is a progression. And for sure, teachers are very happy to be promoted to another one. It's a kind of the ranks in other terms. Yes, next. Right now, talk about CPD and the teacher progression in Rwanda as the notable teachers like or public servants in Rwanda are appraised annually on their performance, with the exception of the special category in which a teacher who fulfills specific requirement evaluation, a teacher is promoted to a high category if he or she completes 3 years of experience in the last grade of the category. Good performance recognizes and shared. Poor performance addressed. Teachers expect the level promoted to higher categories, for example, from junior to senior teacher. And teachers must serve a minimum of 3 years in professional category before they can apply for promotion. Next, we have also CPD and teacher licensing. CPD has a licensing requirement. Teachers must complete mandatory CPD hours for licensing renewal. Professional standard aligned with CPD participation, but also we have regulatory framework, CPD integrated international teacher development policy. CPD is recognized in Rwanda as accreditation bodies monitors CPD monitor CPD implementation and compliance. So for the next, we talk about scalability of CPD programs. First, challenges in scaling CPD. There is, I think, also my colleague Jared mentioned it. Financial constraints in limited resources, insufficient funding and resources shortage, expansion and sustainability of CPD programs, but also disparities in access. Teachers in the urban area often have greater access to CPD opportunity compared to the rural counterparts, creating inequality in professional development. But there is innovation solutions. Blended learning models, combining face-to-face and online learning training models, public-private partnership, mobilizing funding and expertise, and also decentralized CPD hubs, ensuring accessibility at district and the school level. Next. We have now case studies and CPD best practices. In Rwanda, the current situation, teacher training through digital platforms, there is school-based mentorship, competence-based CPD, CPD in Rwanda through school leadership training, coaching and pedagogical capacity building, particularly for head teachers and district education officials. But also the University of Rwanda College of Education plays a critical role in CPD, and English proficiency training is well organized. In Kenya, current situation now, Teacher Professional Development TPD framework, they have mandatory CPD framework as a Teachers Service Commission. I can mention that our department, Teacher Development Management, is the similar like Teacher Service Commission and other contexts. Blended learning approach, partnership with the universities. This is the case study of Kenya. Next. Let's see now in Ghana. Ghana current situation, the continual professional development model, national teacher education curriculum framework. It aligns the CPD with the professional growth trajectories of teachers, but also the teacher learning communities, and peer learning and collaborative problem solving, and incentivize CPD participation. Teacher endpoint towards promotion and salary increment through CPD engagement. In Mauritius, there's the CPD for STEM and digital education, STEM focused on CPD program, specialized training for science, technology, and engineering, and mathematics for STEM teachers. But also there is integration of EdTech tools. Teachers receive training on using digital tools to enhance classroom learning. And the government-funded CPD initiative that financial support ensure a broad participation across different regions. Let's see now in Senegal as the next slide. In Senegal, there is, first of all, yes, Senegal, the decentralized CPD delivery region training center. There is multilingual CPD resources, community-led CPD approach, and for sure, this is very, very important to share with you that we have also the policy recommendations to institutionalize CPD as a requirement for teacher professional growth, strengthen partnership with development partners in NGOs and their private sector, but also ensure sustainable financing mechanism for CPD and leverage technology to expand CPD reach and impact. And finally, enhance CPD quality ensuring CPD quality assurance and accreditation linked with international CPD standards. As conclusion for the next, CPD is really a cornerstone of effective teaching, learning, and national education development. And investing in CPD enhances teacher capacity, improves student outcomes, and also ensure alignment with education goals. And sustained policy commitment, innovative delivery models, and robust partnership are essential for CPD success. And also strengthen CPD policies, investment, and implementation to maximize long-term impact. Call to action. What does we have to develop a national CPD implementation plan with clear milestone, but also accountability mechanism. This is very important. And also decentralized CPD delivered through school-based professional learning communities and provide incentives, example, certification, salary increment to encourage CPD participation. And expand CPD access in rural and underserved areas through mobile and digital solution. Finally, monitor and evaluate CPD effectiveness through data-driven insights and feedback mechanisms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leon, for presentation, the best practices in other countries. That was very interesting. Now I would like to pass the mic to my colleague Murphy to moderate the Q&A session. And I think we have about 25 minutes for that. So that would be perfect. To you, Murphy.
Okay, thank you very much, Camelia. Thank you all the speakers for your excellent presentations. There has been several positive remarks in the chat function, and we have also gathered several questions in the Q&A box. So I have chosen some of the questions and I have assigned them to our speakers based on the topic that they have presented today. But I would ask the other speakers, please feel free to complement your colleagues' answers, and you can step in anytime. And let's hope that we can go through all the questions, but I am not sure as there are quite many. However, please feel free to still submit more questions in the Q&A function. So I would like to start with a question to Dr. Diego Ángel Urdinola. And there was a question from Usman Jabor asking, how can institutions evaluate the effectiveness of CPD programs and ensure that they lead to measurable improvements in teaching quality and student outcomes? Please, Dr. Ángel Urdinola.
No, thank you very much for that question. Well, based on some of the experiences we have at the World Bank, there are different ways to evaluate the success of teacher training interventions. One easy one is kind of going for the pre-test, post-test. Sometimes before the intervention, you may, depending on how much knowledge you want the teacher to know, especially if it's subject-based training, then you may want to ask for a pre-test and a post-test. A pre-test before the training, post-test after the training. That's on new teaching methodologies, things that are more knowledge-based. Now, when you have training about pedagogy, how to teach, then it's a little bit more complex. And then normally class observations tend to work well, whether it's done systematically by observers, or whether it's done by the school principal or by peers. So not a one way, right, to do this, but normally depending on the type of training, whether it is more knowledge based, a simple pre-test, post-test may give you the value added of the training, and if it is on pedagogy, maybe class observations, student feedback, and maybe peer or rector's observations. Over to you.
Thank you very much for your answer. Would anybody else like to comment something? Or shall we go forward? Okay, I will give a question to Mr. Gerard Murasira. And this is from Sylvain Mudahinuaka. Pardon for the pronunciation. And the question is, how can we effectively reintegrate retired teachers into CPD programs, leveraging their expertise, knowledge, and competencies? Many retired teachers remain highly capable. They are retired, but not tired. It is essential to explore ways to empower and connect retired teachers' organizations and associations with schools, enable them to make meaningful contribution to education. What would you say, please, Mr. Murasira?
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, using or benefiting from the support from retired teachers, this is a very fascinating idea, because we found it, we've not yet employed it across the CPDs, but at least in French. In French, we've been observing this importance, just in French, because In our country, people who master French are those ones who are grown up. The current generation are not that good in French. So the retired teachers of French support in teaching, in training of French. So this example can be employed throughout other CPDs and other subjects. I do appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Muratsira. If anybody doesn't want to comment anything more, I will hand over a question to Jenny Wilmot. And there was one question, for example, about by Usman Javoh on what policies can be implemented to ensure that CPD programs for teachers are aligned with national education standards and address the evolving needs of education system. Please, Jenny.
What kind of national policies? Sorry, could you just repeat the question, because I didn't quite catch the whole thing. Sorry.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you.
What policies can be implemented to ensure that CPD programs for teachers are aligned with national education standards and address the evolving needs of the education systems?
Thank you. So I think the example that I used in our presentation around is perhaps less about policies, but more about practices. And so if you've got national policies and national standards, and then CPDs in classrooms, how do you ensure alignment between the two? And I would say that is about ensuring that all the different actors in the system, the district officials, the head teachers, the teachers are involved in the process of designing the CPD. So making sure that's, somebody else asked a question, I think, about, whether CPD needs to be top down or in fact driven by teachers. And I think the answer to that as well is both. I think they're similar questions. So I think it's more about practices and how different people who have a stake in the system collaborate together to ensure that the CPDs are both aligned to national policies and standards, but are also fit for purpose for teachers. And then you'd hope that if there's a gulf between those two things, the policies also would be adapted to ensure that they're meeting the needs of teachers in the classroom.
Great, thank you so much, Jenny. The next question would go to Mr. Leon Mugenzi. And this is a question from Melaku Takele. And he's asking, are CPD needs to be provided by education sector officials, top down, which is something that Jenny just mentioned, or designed by the teachers at their schools? Which one is more effective?
I think there is someone who's disturbing. If you can repeat the question, please, I'll be very happy to answer that.
Of course. So the question was, are CPD needs to be provided by education sector officials or designed by the teachers at their schools? Which one is more effective?
Thank you very much. I think first of all, both are very effective, but education sector, when, for example, they choose a number of CPD as a mandatory course to do as a teacher, I think there is different reason behind, and that it depends also on the education targets and the vision. But I can understand when teachers are choosing themselves what they have to start with, but selecting within those mandatory courses will be very important. But it's not like a teacher is saying, I'm going to do with this one, but that one is not on the list. It cannot be very effective. For me, I prefer that to have, first of all, the list of mandatory CPD courses, and a teacher should normally start or choose which they should start with, and it will be very effective. For me, it's how I understand this.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Then there's one question. I would like to give it to Ramya Vivekananda. If she could give her thoughts, maybe other speakers would also like to intervene. The question is from Usman Jabor, and it goes like this. What policies can be implemented to ensure that CPD programs for teachers are aligned with national education standards and address the evolving needs of the education system?
Sorry, Murphy. I think Ramya had to quit because of another commitment. Maybe we can redirect that question to another speaker.
Okay, is there anybody who would like to volunteer for this question, or shall I assign it for somebody? It is actually aligned with the question that was already presented to Jenny. So we might want to choose another question. I will then go question that was submitted in French. I hope that I have translated it correctly. So the question is, I would like to ask the last presenter. So this would be for Mr. Mugenzi. And the question is for Arfan Sek. Please elaborate a little on the example of Senegal, the impact of the CRFPE. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the case study of Senegal, first of all, I talked about decentralized CPD delivery regional training centers. There is a CPD which is delivered at district levels, reducing the access gap between urban and the rural teachers. And there is also a very important thing, multilingual CPD resources, where there is a training is provided in French and the local languages to improve comprehension. That's very important. And finally, there is community-led CPD approaches. There is collaboration with the local communities and NGO to provide contextualized training. I think in the Senegal, there is a typical example of contextualized training. This is what I can add on a case study of Senegal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mugenzi. I would still like to take one question from here from the Q&A section. And it is related to what Mr. Mugenzi just explained about contextualizing the CPD programs, the continuous professional development programs. And this is related to private sector engagement. And Jenny talked a little bit about that. So I am assigning the question to Jenny. So what strategies can be employed to encourage private sector involvement in the funding and development of CPD programs for teachers?
Yeah, I think that's a challenging area, isn't it? It's something that we've tried to look at here in Uganda with our program. I mean, our primary focus is with the private schools, and that's all countries are different, but here that's a big part of the system is private schools, and so they have contributed to the program financially through their engagement and through co-financing. So that's as far as we've got really in terms of private sector collaboration. But I think given the kind of reduction in development aid across the world, thinking a bit differently about how we might work with different private companies in the country that have an interest in education, who have maybe CSR budgets, is something that I think is useful for all partners to start to develop more. I don't know if any other speakers have examples of where maybe they have developed partnerships with private sector. I'd certainly be very happy to hear about those.
Thank you, Jenny, so much. Would somebody else like to continue?
I'd like just to react on the very important comment in French here when they're saying la progression d'un enseignant doit dépendre de sa formation et de ses connaissances professionnelles, sans oublier ses relations avec son milieu. Donc, c'est un bon commentaire parce que justement, quand tu as une bonne formation initiale, et pour avoir la formation continue, tout dépendra de ce que tu avais reçu au niveau de l'école, mais aussi avec la relation avec ton environnement, là où tu enseignes. Donc, je voulais juste commenter sur ce qu'il a écrit en français. C'est très important. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Mugenji. Camelia, could you please tell me if there's time for a few more questions? We have some hands raised in the audience.
Yes, I think we have 5 or 10 minutes for more questions. Please go ahead.
Okay, so could you please give the unmute Mr. Ismaila Berture?
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Merci beaucoup. Félicitations. Félicitations aux différents présentateurs. Je suis le directeur national adjoint de l'enseignement normal. C'est le service du ministère de l'Éducation nationale chargé de la formation initiale et continue des enseignants et des éducateurs préscolaires. Donc, j'ai suivi avec beaucoup d'intérêt et d'attention les différentes présentations. Nous avons une politique de formation initiale et continue des enseignants au Mali, mais vraiment, je voudrais savoir les CPD, c'est quel genre de dispositif? J'ai eu l'impression que c'est un dispositif de formation continue, mais je voudrais avoir l'assurance que c'est un dispositif de formation continue. Et je voudrais savoir dans quel pays le CPD est appliqué et comment on apprécie les résultats, les impacts, les effets de ce dispositif sur les pratiques professionnelles des enseignants. Voilà, parce que ça peut nous intéresser aussi. Du côté du Mali, mais il faudra bien qu'on comprenne réellement de quoi il s'agit, où ça s'est appliqué et qu'est-ce que cela a donné comme résultats en termes d'amélioration des pratiques professionnelles, des pratiques d'enseignement-apprentissage. Je vous remercie. Merci et encore une fois, félicitations.
Merci beaucoup. I myself am not fluent in French, so I'm not sure if I understood all. Mr. Toure was asking about the effects and impact of the CPD and how can you see the results in the teaching of the teachers. Would somebody like to complement or did any of the speakers understand the question themselves?
Oui, je peux intervenir. En fait, j'ai bien compris la question de Touré et c'est une question très intéressante. En fait, il se pose la question réellement si il y a la mise en œuvre de CPD, la formation continue, l'effectif. Donc, si il y a des exemples concrets d'un pays là où le CPD est bien appliqué. Alors, je dirais que justement, aujourd'hui, il y a toujours un écart entre ce qui est écrit dans les documents relatifs au CPD et la mise en œuvre de ces CPD. Mais je pense qu'il y a des exemples concrets des pays là où on montre réellement que après la formation initiale reçue dans les centres de formation d'enseignants, dans les écoles normales, comme elle a dit qu'il est dans une école normale supérieure au Mali. Donc, je pense que c'est ce qu'il faut actuellement, c'est justement de réduire cet écart qui est entre ce qui est écrit dans les documents par rapport à la théorie de CPD et la mise en œuvre ou à la pratique justement de la formation continue. Mais je suis tout à fait d'accord que des exemples ne sont pas très nombreux, mais quand même, il y a ce qui peut démontrer que c'est possible. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Camelia, would we still have time for one question or shall we move on?
I think one more question, then last question. Go ahead.
Okay. Let's ask the question from Mr. Kayode Isaac Omoto. Could you please, Camelia, unmute? Thank you. Please, Mr. Kayode Isaac.
Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I've already posted a message on the question and answer, but the question was not picked. I want to ask that is there any collaborations between the CPD and Nigeria educational system so as to help teachers in their professionalisms in educational system in the country with the support of our NUT and TRCN going on in this country now? I want to know if there's any collaborations with the CPD and educational system in this country, Nigeria.
Is there somebody specifically that you would like to address your question to?
I'm directing it to the organizer. If they have any information for us, because I connected to this program, I saw it on social media. That's why I connected to the program. I've been following it from the first webinar. It's the third one I'm attending today now. So I've been following it all. That's why I'm trying to ask that, is there any collaboration between this CPD and Nigerian educational system in helping teachers in their professionalism in their... Yes, sir.
Who would like to answer that question? I didn't really follow if it was directly assigned to some of our speakers, but would somebody like to step in? Any of our speakers? Maybe Mr. Gerard Murasira, would you have a reflection for this question?
Well, thank you very much. I personally did not catch well the question because I thought it was related to Nigeria as a country. So if maybe you can elaborate more on it. Is it a specific situation that connection within his country or generally? I didn't catch it well. If you can elaborate. Thank you.
Please, could the person who gave the question, yes, elaborate a bit more?
Sorry, Murphy. I think that was a question really specific about the situation in Nigeria, and currently we don't have any speaker who's very familiar with that context. So hopefully we can receive an answer in another webinar. And it is about time, so I think it's better if we move on. I will save all the questions and comments in the chat, so in the future webinars we hope to address them as well. Yeah, Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Hongi.
Camelia. That sounds good.
Okay, so I'll steal the mic from you. Lastly, I would like to ask my colleague Hongi to give the closing remarks. And before that, please note there is a link to the evaluation survey for this webinar. If you have any feedback, now it's very appreciated. Thank you. Over to you, Hongi.
Hi, Amelia, can you see me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, I can't see myself. Anyway, my name is Njora Hungi. I'm from UNESCO Ekiba, and mine is very short. Would like to thank all the speakers and all the participants for the wonderful webinar. We heard from several speakers and with a rich experience from the GPE from AMIA, the challenges to sustaining CPD beyond the partnership with donor countries and so on. And then the GPE strategies for the engaging teachers and dialogue, with the dialogue moving forward. And from the World Bank, Diego, on the spending trends, and that the government spending on education is generally declining, and that most of this spending goes to teachers, and that we need more investment to ensure learning is happening in our schools. And also from Gerard, from Rwanda, with the experiences from Rwanda of how they're implementing the CPDs there, and how the challenges they are facing also. Jenny, and also with experiences on how they're implementing the partnership with the government and how supporting the government to implement CPDs, and also Leon for the case studies for the CPDs in Africa. So all that is very useful to us for this webinar, and we thank all those speakers for that. Also, we'd like to thank the European Union Regional Teacher Initiative for Africa. Those are our partners in this webinar, and also the GP Kids and ADRC, AFTRA, African Union, and of course ourselves, Ikiba, for this webinar. Moving forward, as you heard from Camila, we have another series of webinars starting on, I think it's 8th of May, during the AFTRA conference in Angola. And I think we'll share with you a link to that. And these webinars will focus on CESA, the new CESA that is coming up, that has just been developed. And so it'll be very interesting to maybe register and see what we have for you for that. And with those very many remarks, maybe very few remarks, over to you, Camila, maybe to say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Hongi. Yes, and thank you to everyone, especially to our speakers, but also to our participants for your very active listening and questions. I think that was a very informative session. If I could ask you to turn on the camera, and we're going to take a very quick Zoom group photo to end this session. Thank you. And it's great that we have over almost 150 participants. So I'll take a few. Thank you so much. Thank you. And once the PowerPoint and recording is made available, I will share it in an email to all participants. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.